This morning, you did something. You woke up and you got dressed. You did not think about it. You did not question it. You just did it, the same way you have done it every single morning of your entire life. But here is the thing. For the first 170,000 years of human existence, nobody did that. There were no clothes, no fabric, no stitching, just skin, open air, and the African savanna stretching out in every direction. So when exactly did we decide to cover ourselves? And why did we do something that every other large animal on the planet never bothered with at all? The answer involves lice. We will get there. Stay with it. First, understand just how strange humans actually are from a biological standpoint. Look at every large mammal that shares this planet with us. Gorillas, chimpanzees, bears, wolves, lions, elephants. All of them, across completely different climates and environments, are covered in fur. Then there is us, smooth, mostly hairless, weirdly exposed, standing in the middle of the animal kingdom like something went wrong along the way. Scientists have a leading theory for why we lost our fur. When our ancestors moved from forest environments onto open grasslands and began hunting by running prey down over long distances, thick fur became a serious liability. Your core temperature spikes. You slow down. You overheat before the animal does. From an evolutionary standpoint, that is a losing strategy. So over hundreds of thousands of years, the fur went. And in its place came something unusual, an extraordinary density of sweat glands. Humans carry somewhere between 2 and 4 million sweat glands on their bodies, more than almost any other creature alive. We are, without any exaggeration, the most efficient cooling machines in the animal kingdom. Excellent in summer. Considerably less useful at -40 degrees with nothing but rocks and open steppe around you. That is where clothes enter the story. But here is where the conventional version falls apart. The standard explanation goes like this. Humans left Africa, encountered cold climates, wrapped themselves in animal skins, and that was that. It is a clean story. Logical. Easy to follow. The problem is the timeline. Genetic evidence places the origin of clothing somewhere between 100,000 and 170,000 years ago. But the major human migration out of Africa did not happen until around 70,000 years ago. That is a gap of at least 30,000 years, possibly much more, between when we started wearing clothes and when we actually went anywhere cold. Which means cold weather cannot be the original reason. Something else was driving it, something social. Something that has more to do with who we are as a species than with the temperature outside. Now, the lice. Researchers at the University of Florida decided to map the evolutionary history of human lice. Not the most glamorous field of study, but what they found changed the clothing origin story permanently. Humans carry 2 distinct types of lice. Head lice, which live in hair, and body lice, which live specifically in clothing. In the seams, in the folds, in the fabric. These are 2 genetically separate populations, and body lice evolved from head lice at one specific moment in history. Here is why that matters. Body lice cannot survive on bare skin. They require fabric. They need the warmth and shelter that clothing provides to complete their life cycle, which means the moment body lice genetically split from head lice is essentially the moment humans started wearing clothes consistently enough to create an entirely new ecological niche for a parasite to move into. When the researchers ran the numbers, body lice diverged from head lice somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. A parasitic insect, one of the most universally despised creatures in all of human history. The thing that causes mass panic in school hallways and ruins camping trips. That insect accidentally preserved the oldest evidence we have for when human beings first got dressed. The lice knew before we did. They were there. They adapted. They moved in. So if it was not cold that drove the first clothing, what was it? One theory is simple physical protection. Not from temperature, but from sun, insects, thorns, sharp grass, rocky terrain. If you spend your days tracking animals through scrubland and tall grass, even a basic wrap of animal hide creates a meaningful barrier between your skin and everything that wants to scratch, bite, or burn it. Practical. Unglamorous. But effective. The second theory is more interesting. Social signaling. Humans are obsessed with hierarchy in a way that runs bone deep. We are constantly communicating who we are, what group we belong to, what rank we hold. We do it with posture, with voice, with hairstyle, and quite possibly from very early on with what we drape over our bodies. There is evidence that our ancestors were decorating their skin with pigments like ochre as far back as 200,000 years ago. That is before the lice evidence for clothing. The impulse to use the body as a visual signal to the group around you may actually be older than fabric itself. We were painting ourselves before we were dressing ourselves. From there, the cognitive leap is not large. Once the hide is on, you start thinking about which hide, how it is worn, what it communicates. Is this the skin of something powerful? Did I kill it myself? Does wearing it say something about who I am? That is the first fashion industry, running somewhere on the African savanna roughly 150,000 years ago. For most of early human history, clothing probably looked rough. A skin thrown over the shoulders, held in place by twisted sinew, crudely cut along the edges with a stone flake. Functional, but primitive. Then around 50,000 years ago, something shifts in the archaeological record. Bone needles appear. Not simple pointed tools, but actual needles with eyes bored through them, designed for threading fiber and stitching material together with precision. Fitted garments. Sewn seams. Clothing shaped deliberately to the body. The oldest confirmed needle with a proper eye was recovered from Denisova Cave in Siberia. It dates back approximately 50,000 years. Made from the hollow bone of a bird, shaped and polished to a fineness that is genuinely remarkable. That object represents a cognitive leap that is hard to overstate. Someone looked at a sliver of bone and envisioned a tool that did not yet exist. Figured out how to bore a clean hole through the narrow end without splitting it. Then used the result to join two pieces of material with a controlled, repeatable stitch. That is not survival instinct. That is engineering. That is design thinking. That is someone solving a problem through imagination rather than brute force. And in Siberia at 50,000 years ago, that needle was not optional. Without properly fitted clothing that seals body heat against the skin, you do not survive a glacial winter. You simply do not. What often gets left out of the clothing origin story is the Neanderthals. They were making and wearing clothes long before they ever encountered modern humans. Archaeological evidence shows systematic processing of animal hides, bones scraped in patterns, consistent with leather preparation, specific stone tools clearly designed for working skin. Their bodies also show anatomical adaptations to cold, stockier frames, shorter limbs, different fat distribution. They had been dealing with serious cold for a very long time, and clothing would have been essential to that survival. And then there are the Denisovans. The third human lineage discovered in 2010 from a single finger bone found in that same Siberian cave. In the same archaeological layers as the needle, researchers found pierced and polished ornaments, suggesting symbolic thinking and deliberate decoration. A people we barely know existed were already thinking carefully about what they were wearing and what it meant. The impulse to clothe the body was not exclusive to our lineage. Multiple human species in different environments arrived at similar solutions through overlapping reasoning, which raises a genuinely unsettling question. Is clothing a human thing? Or is it simply what happens when any creature becomes intelligent enough, social enough, and cold enough to figure out that covering yourself is obviously correct? We do not know. But the convergence across species is very difficult to dismiss. Here is the truly strange thing about human clothing that separates us from every other animal. If clothes were purely practical, every culture across history would converge on the most thermally efficient solution for their environment and stay there. Thick hides in the Arctic, light plant fiber in the tropics, total standardization. That is not what happened. In every culture we have records of, clothing immediately carried symbolic weight far beyond its physical function. Priests wore different things than warriors. Rulers wore garments nobody else was permitted to wear. The dead were buried in specific clothing suited to their status and the journey ahead. Some of the oldest textile fragments ever recovered were dyed in multiple colors. Someone, tens of thousands of years ago, looked at a perfectly functional piece of woven material and thought it needed to be a different color. Not for warmth, but because it would mean something different. We use clothing as language. We use it to say who we are, what group we belong to, what rank we hold, what we are feeling, what we want others to think about us. No other animal does this. Between roughly 120,000 and 70,000 years ago, the climate became brutal. Global temperatures plunged. Ice sheets expanded. Large portions of Africa turned hyper-arid. Food sources collapsed. The human population may have crashed to somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 individuals at its lowest point. We came within a razor's edge of simply not existing anymore as a species before we had even properly begun. For the groups that survived and eventually pushed north and east into colder regions, clothing was no longer a social signal or a practical comfort. It was the difference between living and dying. The groups with sophisticated clothing technology, fitted, layered, stitched, sealed at the wrists and neck, carried a survival advantage so significant it is difficult to fully measure. A well-constructed garment traps warm air against the body. It protects the places where blood runs close to the surface and heat escapes fastest. It allows a human being to survive temperatures that would kill an unclothed person in hours. Those with the needle and the knowledge of how to use it made it through. Their children learned the same skills. And those skills carried forward across generations are a direct reason why modern humans eventually reached every continent on Earth. We did not just evolve bodies suited for the world. We built a second skin and carried it with us everywhere we went. Eventually, animal hides gave way to woven plant fibers. The oldest known twisted plant fiber dates to roughly 30,000 years ago, recovered from a cave in Georgia, already dyed in multiple colors, already decorative, already saying something beyond simple function. By the time of the Neolithic agricultural revolution, textile production had become a core technology of civilization. Flax for linen, wool from domesticated sheep, cotton, silk. Entire trade routes were built on fabric. Empires were financed by it. Wars were fought over access to the raw materials for it. Silk alone reshaped the political geography of half the world. All of this from a cold, hairless primate with clever hands and a sliver of bird bone. Whatever you are wearing right now, you made choices about it. Conscious ones and unconscious ones. And those choices say something about who you are, how you feel, what group you belong to, what version of yourself you are presenting to the world today. You are doing exactly what that person on the African savannah was doing 150,000 years ago, wrapped in ochre-stained hide, figuring out how to signal something about themselves to the people standing around the same fire. That is not a small connection. That is the entire thread. We got cold. We got creative. We got dressed. And then we spent the next 150,000 years complaining we had nothing to wear.